Now engine running.
Absolute genius.
Get this.
Welcome.
This is the show where we bring you
Science.
What that essentially means is
discoveries,
advances,
Questions. Research.
technology. Unbelievable.
Without further ado,
This is The Naked Scientists. Hello, welcome to The Naked Scientists podcast, the programme that brings you the biggest breakthroughs and talks to the major movers and shakers in the worlds of science, technology and medicine. I'm Chris Smith, and coming up, we review what happened with the cruise ship hantavirus outbreak, remarkable new insights into how our smell sense is organised in our noses, and the Trump administration releases a tranche of UFO files. So what's in them? First this week, let's catch up with what happened with the recent outbreak of hantavirus aboard the MV Hondius, the expedition ship carrying 150 people that left Argentina at the beginning of April, but has since seen a number of passengers and crew struck down with this infection. Now, virologists often name new viruses after where they were first found. Zika virus, for instance, was initially described in Uganda's Zika forest, while the Ebola river flowing through what's now the Democratic Republic of the Congo needs no explanation for the dread disease that was documented there. Hantaviruses are chips off the same block.
The original name of the virus family comes from the first one that was isolated in Korea back in the 70s near a river called the Hantan River, hence the name hantavirus. But within that family there's maybe 60 or more different viruses spread across the world, and there's plenty more to find.
As Cambridge University's Colin Crump so eloquently puts it, hantaviruses were first discovered in Northeast Asia, with the then newly identified virus linked to outbreaks of what had been a mystery disease among soldiers fighting in the Korean War. There are now more than 30 different known species, and they break down conveniently into two main groups, an Old World group in Europe and Asia, and a more recently discovered New World group that circulates in the Americas. It's this newer group that's behind the present outbreak on the MV Hondius, and it's one species from that group in particular, known as the Andes strain, that's the culprit. Now, the natural carriers of these viruses are small rodents, like rats and mice, and it's because we are poorly adapted to these viruses, because we run into them relatively rarely, and because hantaviruses are equally poorly adapted to us for the very same reason, that the infections tend to be severe when they happen. Indeed, mortality rates approaching 50% are routinely documented with these New World hantavirus strains. Here's infectious diseases specialist Bahuma Tatanji at Emory University.
One of the things that has been very well characterized, particularly in the case of the strains of hantavirus found in the Americas, is that the virus has the ability to really affect the lining of blood vessels called the endothelial lining. And what it does is that it renders this cellular lining of the blood vessels leaky. You then have fluid that could potentially leak into the lungs, leading to what we call a cardiopulmonary syndrome in the most extreme cases. So that is why you probably have heard described that individuals may have difficulty with breathing, requiring advanced respiratory support from mechanical ventilation all the way to something we call extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, which is just a system that allows the blood to be oxygenated outside the body and provide the highest level of support while someone is not able to use their own lungs for that oxygen exchange.
Now, frightening though that sounds, one reassuring statistic is that, as a rule, and probably owing to their poor optimization for human infection, hantaviruses don't tend to transmit between us. So the World Health Organization, whom we'll hear from shortly, doesn't think they're a good bet for triggering an epidemic or a pandemic anytime soon. But what is known about what happened aboard the MV Hondius? Well, at the moment, we can't say. And as the WHO have reported, epidemiological investigations are ongoing. But there are several possible scenarios. One is that the cases identified so far all acquired the infection ashore and took the infection afloat with them. A second hypothesis is that perhaps the ship itself is the source via a resident population of rodents, although the company have denied that there are rats and mice aboard, and one would have to wonder why just this cruise experienced the problem if that were the case. A third possibility is that one or more individuals acquired the infection on a bird-watching trip to a rubbish tip and then took the disease on the boat with them. Amesh Adalja at Johns Hopkins University.
I think it has to do with what activities a human does, because you just don't always come into contact with these rodents in everyday life. So if you look at this outbreak that's occurred on the ship, the first patient was somebody who was bird watching and going to places like garbage dumps and places like that to look for birds. That activity, that human activity, what that person was doing had an increased risk.
So where does that leave us? Well, right now the priority is to identify any individuals with a significant exposure to anyone subsequently confirmed as a hantavirus case. And should a contact become symptomatic, they'll undergo rapid testing. If positive, they'll be moved to a specialised unit for isolation and care. Bahuma Titanji again.
For now, most countries are having the approach that individuals who qualify as high risk, who were in close contact with a probable or confirmed case, will be taken to facilities where they can be monitored for clinical symptoms, tested, and potentially also confined and quarantined throughout that period where they remain at a high risk for developing symptoms up to 6 weeks from their last contact or exposure contact.
There are no antivirals or vaccines to block hantaviruses, so supportive care is the mainstay, and the best outcomes seem to be achieved when this is implemented promptly. The current stance of health authorities is that there is a very low likelihood that this outbreak will spread any further. This is based partly on the argument that this family of viruses has existed for thousands of years, been known to us for decades, caused outbreaks and isolated cases over many years, and yet produced only localised problems with very little evidence ever of onward spread. Moreover, hantaviruses also seem to evolve only very slowly, making the likelihood of the emergence of a more significant human threat that much less likely. Maria van Kerkhove is Director of Emerging Infections at the World Health Organization.
What I feel confident in is the management of all of these individuals and the active follow-up now. So I think if we do see additional cases, it doesn't mean that the situation is out of control. It just means that laboratory testing is underway. People will get medical care. We haven't had any more deaths. And while we have had 3 deaths that are tragic, we haven't had any further deaths among the confirmed cases or anywhere else. And I think that is a good sign. The people who are in ICU in the Netherlands and in South Africa, in Switzerland are doing well. So that, to me, is incredibly encouraging.
Maria van Kerkhove there, Director of Emerging Infections at the World Health Organization. And we will keep an eye on that story and we will bring you any further information as it's uncovered. Now, in other news, scientists in America have created the first detailed map of the smell receptors in the nose. The study builds on similar achievements in the visual system, hearing and touch, and the findings, which have been published in the journal Cell, may in the future help to develop better therapies for people with loss of their sense of smell, anosmia, or damage to it, a state called parosmia. Bob Datter is a neurobiologist at Harvard Medical School.
Odors are small, volatile chemicals that we sense through our noses, and they're detected by specialized molecules called odor receptors. And so you can think of odor receptors as being like locks and odors as being keys. And so when a key matches to its lock, it turns and the receptor will become activated, and that allows the nose and eventually the brain to know what it is you're smelling. And the question we really wanted to understand was, are there different patterns of receptor expression in your nose creating a map for smell?
Did previously people think it was just a sort of mosaic then, that these receptors that detect things just randomly scattered all over the top of the nose where we do smelling, and that when a certain smell goes up your nose, those receptors fire off and you say, oh, I can smell that? Or did we have some insight and instinct that perhaps there would be clusterings of molecules that detect this group of smells are in one place versus molecules that detect other, or receptors that detect other smells are in this place? What did we think?
Yes, so the initial sense from the 35 years of work that people have done trying to figure out whether there's a pattern of receptor expression in the nose largely supported a model in which receptors were kind of randomly scattered about in your nose. I think that's important to realize is that we have a lot of these receptors. In humans, we have about 400 different receptors. And in mice, the subject of our study and the organism in which I work, there are about 1,000 different receptors. And so there's so many of these receptors, no one thought it was possible to even build a map out of so many different things. And so people thought that maybe the sensory neurons in your nose, the cells that are responsible for detecting smells, were just kind of randomly choosing which receptor to express. And so there was a kind of random mosaic, which means that my nose fundamentally is organized slightly differently from your nose.
How then have you pursued this to try and work out what the map, if it's there, might be?
Modern technologies let us look at which receptors and other genes are expressed in single olfactory sensory neurons, cells in your nose that allow you to smell. And taking advantage of that technology, along with new mapping technologies that let us look at where receptors are in different tissues, we were able to map spatial positions of all 1,000 of these receptors very precisely in the mouse nose. And that revealed a surprising map.
So there is a pattern.
There is a pattern. It turns out the pattern is going from the top to the bottom of your nose. There are 1,000 different stripes which have precise positions, and each one of those stripes corresponds to a particular odor receptor. So the odor receptors that are at the top of your nose are very different from the odor receptors that are in the middle and different from the ones that are at the bottom. And critically, the ordering of these 1,000 stripes was the same across all 350 mouse samples that we looked at. And so what that means is that it's very likely that my nose is actually organized in the same way as yours.
That's good to know, or nose. Boom. But how is that achieved then, and why does nature go to the trouble of doing that? What's the advantage of organising stripes of different zones of chemical detection like that?
No one believed that the nervous system was capable of organizing 1,000 things so precisely. So the fact that it does is a kind of miracle in and of itself. Then, given that we have this map now, the question is, why is the map organized the way it is? And so I can tell you many possibilities, all of which we're working on in the lab today. One possibility is that maybe different aspects of odor chemistry are encoded in this map. So maybe alcohol molecules, like in beer, maybe those are detected at the top. And maybe sulfur molecules, like in natural gas, maybe those are at the bottom. Another possibility is that maybe odor categories are organized in space. So maybe citrus is at the top and meat is at the bottom. Or maybe odor meaning is organized in the map. Maybe things you like are at the top and smells you hate are at the bottom. Any one of those things is possible. We've just begun to scratch the surface of this map. We think that some aspects of odor chemistry may live in this map. There's a lot of work left to do before we really understand what the map means.
The other intriguing thing is that different molecules that are very good at binding onto their receptors versus ones that are not very good at binding onto their receptors, they're better detected when air goes faster or slower. So does the positioning of the receptors also get dictated by how fast the air's moving or how much air is moving over that patch of the nose that does the smelling for those molecules?
Oh, that's such a wonderful question. And actually, one of the things that we're looking at, another way you can think about what you just said is that, there's some lighter molecules, some odors that are really light and volatile, like ammonia. And there's some heavier odor molecules, like the scent of fat, for example. And maybe based upon airflow and the weight of odor molecules, different receptors are differently positioned to optimally detect molecules of different weights and volatilities in the context of airflow. And that's definitely something we're looking at right now.
So if I compare, say, a dog, which a dog's sense of smell is way beyond the resolution of ours. Obviously, that's why we use dogs to go and find things and people and so on. When you add more resolution like that and more smelling ability, they basically got the same pattern, but it's just got more receptors or a wider spectrum of receptors, or is the organisation different, do you think?
So I think it's probably true that the organization itself is a little bit different. Humans have 400 receptors, mice have 1,000. Many dog species have 2,000 different types of receptors. So they really do have much more resolution over the odor world when compared to us or even mice. And so it's likely that they not only have more receptors, but those receptors are placed in a different order in their nose. And that might help them detect different types of smells and organize information about smells a little more effectively than in us.
Bob Datter at Harvard Medical School there.
The Naked Scientists podcast is produced in association with Spitfire, cost-effective voice, internet and IP engineering services for UK businesses. Find out how Spitfire can empower your company at spitfire.co.uk.
Music in the programme is sponsored by Epidemic Sound, perfect music for audio and video productions.
This is the Naked Scientist podcast with me, Chris Smith. Still to come, what the UFO files released by the Trump administration do or do not reveal. But first, there's just a month to go until the biggest football tournament in the world begins. Attention, though, isn't just on the World Cup itself, but on the searing temperatures that the players are likely to experience during the international showpiece. They'll have to cope with extreme heat, thunderstorms and high humidity, as well as poor air quality from wildfires in some places during the tournament, which is taking place this year across 3 nations for the first time. So we wondered how well the human body can cope with these extremes, especially of temperature, and what impacts might this have on play. To find out, we went to someone who works on this topic for a living and also puts his knowledge to good use personally because he is himself an accomplished marathon runner.
I'm Christoph Schweening and I work at PDN, Physiology, Development and Neuroscience at the University of Cambridge, where I'm a lecturer.
The World Cup is for the first time going to be played not in 1, not in 2, but in 3 countries this year, and 2 of them are going to have matches played in places that are really hot. We're talking mid-30s or higher. What constraints and impacts does that have on the human body trying to exercise with that kind of intensity in those sorts of temperatures?
That all depends on whether they have practiced or had some experience playing in that kind of heat, because it's all about self-pacing. So if you start off a football match at full throttle in the heat, you will warm up pretty rapidly. So within about 15, 20 minutes, you're going to be circulating blood, not just through all your muscles, through your skin as well. And that's going to put quite a strain. You're going to be getting hot and you're going to have a circulating blood volume issue. So you're going to tire quickly. But I suspect most players are not going to be doing that. They're going to be cautious at the start. They're going to be sweating a lot. It's going to be uncomfortable for them. They're going to be instrumented, I guess. Their core temperatures will be measured. They're having breaks. So, yeah, they're going to get hot, sweaty and tired.
I suppose if you're diverting a whole load of blood to your skin, the purpose being you want to get the hot blood to give its heat away to the environment to cool you down, that's blood that is not going to muscles, and that's going to impact on performance.
That's absolutely the case. So the blood is going to the skin not just to move the heat to the skin, but also to supply the fluid for the sweating. So these guys are going to be losing about 4 litres of sweat throughout the whole of the match. And that, of course, means that less blood is going to be available, not just to circulate around the muscles, but also to the brain as well. So if they really go for it and go really hard, then we're going to see some bad decisions out on the pitch, because football is a game of skill largely. It's not really a running race. There's a lot of kicking and passing and collecting the ball as well. So all of those judgments start to become slightly critical as the players become very hot, tired and somewhat depleted on their circulating blood.
If body temperature, though, is 37 degrees C, give or take, right, and we're in an environment which is about that, why does it feel hot, though? Because it's the same temperature as you are.
You're producing heat, and these guys, when they're running around, they're going to be producing maybe up to 2 kilowatts worth of heat. So 2-bar electric fire, they're going to be flicking on and off. And so that heat has to flux out of the body. Now, if the environment is the same temperature as your body, you're not going to be able to radiate the heat. You've got to lose all of that heat out as evaporative water. So you've got to imagine this as being turning on your cooker, putting a saucepan on the top, putting water in it, and it's going to be boiling away furiously. Now, that's a small area in the saucepan. They're going to be evaporating the water throughout their whole of their skin. So they're going to feel hot because literally the only thing cooling them down is the sweating and the loss of heat through the latent heat of vaporization of water.
Will the body allow its temperature to rise, though? So if you put somebody in that situation and put that sort of demand on the body, will your body temperature rise, or will those mechanisms we've been discussing, sweating, radiating heat through the skin, will that keep your body temperature at what it should be?
No. So first of all, body temperature travels within a range. So you might wake up in the morning, you might be down at 36.5 degrees C. And if you exercise intensely, by the time you get to about 40 degrees C, you're not going to want to do any more exercise.
People actually get that hot,
Oh,
don't
yeah.
they?
Oh, yeah. They will easily get up to about 40 degrees C. And for a well-trained athlete, it's not necessarily a problem, but the motivation to generate more heat will drop severely. So these will be players who will be sweating away and not wanting to really do much other than collect and pass a ball onward. So the brain is self-limiting in terms of how hot you get, but you don't have the heat loss capacity to keep core body temperature at what you would consider the normal resting value. It will rise.
One of the things that they have said they are going to do, anticipating that this is going to put pressure on people, is to have little breaks, 3-minute breaks in the games. Is that enough to make a meaningful difference?
Well, that all depends what you do. If you just have an ice lolly or something, definitely not. But if you're going to plunge into an ice cold water bath, then yes, 3 minutes, you can lose a considerable amount of heat, but you need really special measures. So simply spraying yourself with water, not enough. It needs to be a severe cooling shock. So if they just stand there for 3 minutes, no, that's not going to have any effect at all. If they plunge into ice cold water, fantastic. They'll be able to bring temperature down by a meaningful, 0.2, 0.3 of a degree C, which will give them a bit more headroom to work a bit harder in the next period.
Can you train to be better at controlling your temperature, though? So if you're a team that play in Mexico in these sorts of temperatures all the time, can you adapt? As in, do you get better at sweating and that kind of thing compared to, say, I don't know, say Antarctica had a team? I bet they wouldn't sweat that much, right? But do you find that you adapt and therefore there is a degree of accommodation already so that teams could be an advantage if they play under those conditions already?
Okay, Chris, I think you're falling into a trap there of thinking that just because people play in a cold environment that they're not going to adapt to heat. So you two in Cambridge here, where it's relatively cool at the moment, can really adapt your thermal control systems very well. Just layer up a little bit and you will tune up those sweat glands, so drive the sweat glands and also modify your brain. As you get hot, your brain will modify its feed-forward responses to thermoregulation. So you will start sweating much earlier as soon as you exercise. So heat acclimation doesn't require a footballer or an athlete to be in a hot environment. They just need to make themselves hot. And these athletes, these football players, will be heat training right now.
Now that puts a whole new spin on the term fever pitch, doesn't it? Physiologist Christoph Schweening there. The Trump administration have released files on what has been called unidentified anomalous phenomena, or UFOs, to you and me. The documents include descriptions of objects spotted during NASA's lunar missions and even images and videos of recent sightings in the Middle East. David Whitehouse is a leading science writer and broadcaster and also author of the book that considers our place in the cosmos alongside our possible ET neighbours, The Alien Perspective. So what does he make of this latest disclosure?
Well, actually, I must say I'm really rather disappointed, not only in the files that have been released, but the organization, the American government that's released them, because some of these files are, if I can put it, rather dumb. You can look at them, and experts within minutes of them being released had explanations for practically all of them. So how come the War Department, responding to President Trump's initiative to release everything it has about strange objects in the sky, release things which can immediately be interpreted and explained when they're supposed to be the experts?
Well, what sorts of things, David? What jumped out at you?
One thing which is obviously a balloon floating above the water, and you can see the string from the balloon moving around, being pulled around by the tide. There's another one which is obviously a flare being dropped by a parachute, and the interesting thing with that is that the flare is so bright it's produced what's called a diffraction pattern in the camera that's looking at it, and the diffraction pattern is a symmetric star type object, perfectly understandable. And also the strange objects which are supposed to have been seen on pictures taken on the surface of the moon on Apollo 12 and Apollo 17. There's a couple of pictures of the lunar horizon, and there are faint light smears in the distance. And so-called UFO experts have been talking about objects orbiting the moon, and isn't this strange? But these are obviously film defects. And if you look at other Apollo pictures, you can see similar pictures. Now, the pictures from the Apollo missions are absolutely superb because of the cameras were specifically designed for this. But during the printing process back on Earth, there was occasionally a bit of dust, a bit of smear, etc. And this is well known. So how is it that the War Department can release a series of pictures, fuzzy blobs, which are fuzzy blobs, you don't know what on earth they are, but the rest of them are so obviously explainable, is a puzzle to me.
Didn't Buzz Aldrin say he saw something?
All astronauts have reported strange things. On the first American to orbit the Earth, John Glenn, he reported strange objects like fireflies. And that is mentioned in the UFO reports. Buzz Aldrin said he saw something. Many astronauts said they saw something. In every case, they've been identified as a bit of rocket debris. Because when you go to the moon and you separate from your carrier rocket, there are occasionally panels which follow you along the same course until you change trajectory. And Buzz Aldrin saw these things and commented on them. You know, it happened live during the mission. We all knew about it in 1969. It had an explanation with rocket panels that are moving slowly away from the spacecraft. So to find them, you know, over 50 years later in a War Department distribution saying they are strange, and also all these pressure groups and enthusiasts and conspiracy theories misrepresenting something as being a UFO strange encounter type thing when it's a bit of space debris is, I think, typical of the whole frenzy which Trump was responding to with releasing this boring set of pictures.
Are they a smokescreen then? Do you think this is just deflection because the news isn't all good on the international stage? There are things that people would rather didn't get dug into too deeply circulating as well. So is this just a way of creating a diversion? People get sucked into this kind of thing and fills up column inches that might otherwise contain juicier stories.
It could be. I mean, certainly in America particularly, there is an absolute frenzy about UFOs and aliens and life in space. These disappointing images were everywhere for a few days. And people speculate they take people's minds off other things, Epstein, the war in Iran, and all these other things. There may be an element to that. I'm not sure. But certainly, if you look at what's happening, it's following a sort of cultural pattern. Ever since 2017, when a very awful article, incredibly inaccurate article, was published in the New York Times about UFOs, there has been the build-up with social media and YouTube channels and influencers, a whole society and subculture of UFO enthusiasts who are convinced that alien life has been found, we are interacting with aliens, we have crashed flying saucers, and that the government is reluctant and hiding this as a conspiracy. And there are hundreds of thousands of people who look at these YouTube channels. There are conferences, there are books, there are film deals. Steven Spielberg is a very clever chap, and he, a couple of years ago, caught onto the zeitgeist. And a film of his is coming out in a few weeks called Disclosure Day, which is all about the government keeping UFO secrets and some heroes getting the truth out there. And so it's almost as if it doesn't matter if we have aliens or not, because there's no evidence for that. This has become a culture, a focus for people who are disaffected with governments, who want to believe strange things, and who want something in their lives that is as dramatic and potentially as important as this could be.
So nothing to see here, according to David Whitehouse, science writer, broadcaster and author of The Alien Perspective. That is it for today. Do tune in on Tuesday, though, when we're going to be combing through what science is discovering about depression, including new ways to treat it, and why we increasingly believe that this is lots of different conditions all manifesting in a similar way. Now, before we go, a big thank you to everyone who's been supporting us. We do rely very heavily on your donations to keep this show on the road. And if you can help us and you do appreciate what we do for you every week, do please head over to nakedscientist.com/donate. There's a very safe, simple and secure system there for making donations either in a one-off or regular fashion. And we really are grateful. nakedscientist.com/donate if you can help us. I'm Chris Smith. Thanks for listening, and from all of us here at the Naked Scientist team, until Tuesday, goodbye.